It says Conclave, the next Pope, Judah Lion Lifestyle TV. And if you don't have access to internet or whatever, you got a phone or you got something, enjoy.
The Cardinals will now take the oath to this Cardinal Caroline, of course, the Secretary of State presiding, and we have a translator for the Latin.
Ut quetibi placit assumpto, toto corde cognosca, et agnita tota virtute septenti, per Christum Dominum nostrum.
That's the last prayer. That's not the oath.
Of course, the oath that they will swear together and individually promises to keep the secrecy regarding everything in any way that relates to the election of the new Pope. Let's listen.
Nos esse fideliter et diligenter
Everyone, the cardinal electors engaged in this election of the Supreme Pontiff, promise, vow, and swear that we will inviolably and scrupulously observe with faith and diligence all that is contained in the Apostolic Constitution of the Supreme Pontiff John Paul II, which begins with the words Liberty Dominici, issued on the 22nd day of February in the year 1996, together with the changes made to it through the apostolic letter Normas Non Nullus, given motu proprio by the Supreme Pontiff Benedict XVI on the 22nd day of February in the year 2013. Likewise, we promise, vow, and swear that whichever of us, by divine disposition, shall be elected Roman Pontiff, will faithfully carry out the Petrine ministry of pastor of the Universal Church, and will never fail to affirm and defend strenuously the spiritual and temporal rights and the liberty of the Holy See. Above all, we promise and swear to observe with the utmost fidelity and with all, whether clerics or lay people, secrecy regarding everything that in any way pertains to the election of the Roman Pontiff, and regarding what takes place in the place of election, directly or indirectly concerning the scrutiny, not to break this same secrecy in any way, either during or after the election of the new pontiff, unless explicit authorization has been granted by the same pontiff. And likewise, we swear never to lend support or favor to any interference, opposition, or any other form of intervention whereby secular authorities of any order or degree, or any group of people or individuals, might wish to intervene in the election of the Roman Pontiff.
Et ego Petrus cardinalis Caroline spondeo atiuro. Sic me Deus adjuvet. Et ex
Caroline, who is presiding over the oath as a group, and now each individual cardinal placed their hand on the book of Gospels and delivered their oath as well to uphold the secrecy of the conclave. And there you see it at the front of the chapel.
Yes, it is quite something to have Jesus Christ in judgment looking down on you as you make your oath. I don't think you can get any more solemn than that. And putting your hand on that book of the Gospels.
As you can hear, one by one, they'll stand before that book and they will say their own name and say, I do so promise, pledge, and swear, placing their hand on the Gospels, saying, so help me God. And then these holy Gospels, which I touched with my hand. Of course, this is Cardinal Conclave from the Philippines, widely considered to be in the running to become the next pope. And again, I'm very careful to say that because there's also the saying, if you enter a pope, you come out a cardinal.
Right. And I think the Cardinals are better than anyone. They know not to get their heads ahead of them.
This is Cardinal Prevost from America, the United States, born in Chicago. And tearing around, you can see in the faces of these cardinals the profound weight of the words, swearing their oath to uphold the secrecy of these proceedings.
It is a solemn moment there. There's no question about it. You can see that. This is also a sacred ceremony. It is core part of their faith, and it's all on the line as they take this oath. The responsibility they have to look into their conscience and their understanding of the world and the church and make the best decision they can, and then their responsibility to keep it secret, to keep the deliberations secret. And I was also struck by the passage that they swear not to let any secular outside power or influence affect their votes. Obviously, that's been a problem in the church at various times in its long history. But I was also thinking that this is the constitution that Pope St. John Paul II put in. He knew what it was like to practice his faith, to lead a flock under communism in Poland. Knew what secular influence could be, and here it is in this oath. It needs to be about this church, the people of God, and the best decision that they can make for it.
Terry, we're looking at Cardinal Peter Erdu of Hungary, been an archbishop there since 2002, 71 years old, born in Budapest during communist rule. And Father Martin, he also was considered a potential contender here.
He is, I would say, slightly on the more traditional side. Cardinal Erdo has been seen as a kind of a candidate that might draw together some people who would like to, maybe make the church a little more traditional and pull back a little bit from some of Pope Francis's reforms.
You're about to see Cardinal Daniel DiNardo of the United States as well, 75 years old. There you hear him say his name. Born in Steubenville, Ohio. He's a retired Archbishop of Galveston, Houston. In fact, there are 10 cardinals from the United States who are delivering their oath as 10 cardinals of the 133 who will soon be sequestered inside the Sistine Chapel. Of course, when the oaths are completed, it's not long after we hear those words, extra omnes, which means essentially everybody out.
David, you mentioned those cardinals from America, but never a pope from America. That also would be a first, though not necessarily on the bingo card. But as we're hearing the echo here, this is being broadcast live in St. Peter's Square. And as Terry mentioned, despite all the pomp and pageantry here, there really is, it's like a solemn moment. And if we look at the root meaning in Latin of conclave, it means conclave, of course, reflecting the secrecy of these cardinals ultimately being locked into place. But until then, in the last few moments here, as they pontificate about the next pontificate, certainly down to prayer at this point. All the politicking while they're in this room will be over.
And it does begin, Lindsay, after the oaths, the singular oaths of each one of these cardinals is delivered.
Het eco anonymous cardinalis malis, fondeo ovio ad nuovo, sic me Deus adjuve, et ex sancta Dei Evangelia, per manu mea tango. Et ego suum bras cardinali diabis, fondeo ovio ad nuovo, sic me Deus adjuvet, et eco sancta Evangelia, per manu mea tango.
Et ego omnes cardinalis collens, spondeo vodeo et juro, sic me Deus adjuvet, et ex sancta Dei Evangelia, per manu mea tango.
Et ego, willem de povus cardinalis Eik, fondeo.
Our hearing Cardinal Willem Jacobus VIII of the Netherlands, considered to be a potential contender for the next Pope, 71 years old, raised by a Protestant father and Catholic mother.
Ego, Joseph Cardinalis Spondeo Ovio ad Nuovo.
And you can see behind the cardinal currently delivering the oath, that's Timothy Dolan standing behind him. Obviously well-known back in the United States, cardinal from New York City, or St. Louis, Missouri. Let's listen.
Sic Deus adjuvet, et ex sancta Dei Evangelia, per manu mea tango.
Et ego vaina Maria cardinalis virti, spondeo oveo ad nuovo, sic me Deus adjuvet, et ex sancta Dei Evangelia, per manu mea tango.
Ego Jacobus cardinalis Arvin, spondeo oveo ad juro, sic me Deus adjuvet.
This is Cardinal Michael Harvey, born in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. He was ordained by Pope Paul VI, later entering Vatican's diplomatic service.
Cardinalis Cunis, fondeo oveo ad nuovo, sic me Deus adjuvet, sancta Dei Evangelia.
There in Italian. What's so interesting is that once they're inside the conclave, there is no translation, and not everyone obviously speaks Italian fluently. And so it's interesting that in these congregations and meetings that are taking place along the edges prior to this day, in many cases people talk simply to people who can speak their own language, right? And that language might be literally, but also as far as the direction of the church. But again, regardless of where you are in the world, there are so many millions who feel connected to this century.
Of course, speaking Italian is almost a prerequisite if you're going to be Pope office.
Well, that's right, and a lot of people have been looking at who speaks Italian. There was much kind of commentary once who when the cardinal celebrated his first public mass in Italian. Another cardinal said he doesn't speak Italian, and he's happy that he doesn't speak Italian, so he takes him off the list. But they are looking for someone who is, I think, at least well versed in Italian language and the Vatican culture here.
Sic me Deus adjuvet, et ex sancta Dei Evangelia,
poi vanno nella casa.
Terry Brown talked about the congregations leading up to this moment. Once the Sistine Chapel and the conclave begins, and as Lindsay mentioned, Latin for with key, they lock up the doors of the Sistine Chapel, and you're inside. There isn't a, a grand amount of drama. There isn't a cardinal who suddenly stands and becomes sort of a kingmaker, turning their vote in one direction or the other. Taking over that sort of 2/3 threshold. It's quiet, it's thoughtful, it's a chapel filled with prayer. And so these congregations where these cardinals have met and gathered and talked in the days preceding the conclave are extraordinarily important.
They do exchange.
Like and share, subscribe, folks. Choosing the next pope. Go ahead and subscribe. Hit the subscribe button. Like, share.
It's not there's an old Hollywood version of a conclave in the movie The Shoes the Fisherman with Anthony Quinn, where somebody stands up and starts shouting, making a big speech. That doesn't happen. One of the things that we've heard cardinals say here as we kind of buttonholed them as they made their way into those congregations is the word discern. We're trying to figure out what the church needs, and in their belief what the Holy Spirit is guiding them to do. It's a more contemplative, for many of them, a more contemplative operation of the mind and heart, rather than the kind of brawny politicking we're used to in conventions and campaigns in the United States. It's a unique election.
Now, after they actually have the morning and the afternoon voting sessions, Terry, they are allowed to speak with one another. They just can't speak with the outside world.
That's right, and that is where I imagine, if you saw the movie Conclave, which is a more recent version of it, that there is something like that in those in-between the votes, in between their times in the Sistine Chapel. We are discussing who's ahead, how much strength one person can have, the interests that they might share with people with cardinals from other places or other traditions, and that is where you'll have good discussions and a little bit of old-fashioned politics.
Father Martin, we're seeing the cardinal there. Who is next? It's Cardinal Charles Monbeau from Myanmar, 76 years old, the same age as Pope Francis, and Francis made him Myanmar's first ever cardinal in 2015.
Yeah, he's a lovely guy. He was also with the synod. I got to know him a little bit. Very soft-spoken, quiet, friendly, smiling. I think if he were made pope, who knows, he'd be a good evangelizer and someone I think would really make good contact with people around the world.
James Longman, who is down in St. Peter's Square, also watching the individual votes here to uphold the secrecy of this conclave. And James was assigned with a task over these last few days of interacting with the cardinals the best he could as they left the congregations, these meetings that were being had after Pope Francis's funeral, and in that window of time before the conclave to get a chance to know one another and where those conversations, we talk about the sort of politicking, the making of the case, if you will, and it's more often than not, James, fellow cardinals who will suggest one of their peers and say this might be a good idea or a strong idea for the church to meet this moment, rather than the cardinal themselves walking up to others saying, vote for me.
Yeah, it was described to me as a process of elimination, David. If not him, then not him, then not him, then perhaps him. And that's absolutely how this works. The moment someone comes forward themselves, that would rule them out, I think it's fair to say. We're watching these men come forward now, and I'm just struck by the faces we're seeing. This underlines the diverse nature of Francis' church. Each one of these men coming forward, giving this Latin oath. And this is the most diverse conclave that we have ever seen. There are 23 Asian cardinals taking part in this. There were only 10 for the last two conclaves, 18 from Africa, only 11 in the last two. But I also think it's important to underline to people watching at home that diversity doesn't necessarily cut along the same progressive conservative line that people might imagine. And that means that conservative progressive is an oversimplification of these groups of men here. There's so much more at play. It will come down to the individual, as each individual comes forward to give this hope.
James, thank you. The bell's tolling here behind us in St. Peter's Square. And next up right here, this is Cardinal Carlos Osoro, Serra of Spain. He's actually the oldest cardinal to take part in this conclave. He turns 80 next week. So we got him just by about a week's time, Father Martin.
Yes, I'm sure you'd be very happy about that. Cardinals often will tell you that this is the most important thing they do. When a person is named a cardinal, that's what's on their mind. They will be charged with electing the next pope.
As James points out, this is the most diverse conclave that we have witnessed. 53 of the cardinals in that room still hail from Europe, 16 from North America, 4 from Central America, 17 from South America, and as James points out, 18 from Africa, 23 from Asia, which was truly reflective of Pope Francis and one of his goals, which was to extend the church to every corner of the world. As they swear their oath to secrecy, Lindsay, we heard from Timothy Dolan from New York City, Cardinal Dolan, and his final message. You see the door is still open to the Sistine Chapel with the Swiss Guard, not for much longer. But Cardinal Dolan saying, this is the last time you'll be hearing from me, perhaps for several days. Each one of these cardinals, and many of them, communicate through social media. They very much know the tools to reach the faithful in this moment. But those tools are put away. We are returned to sort of medieval times, if you will, a church that's 2,000 years old, that they'll decide who the next pope is in very simple ways that they decided centuries ago.
And not only is the Sistine Chapel swept for all the kinds of electronic devices that might be used to communicate, but also Santa Marta, where they're staying. The same is true there. They can communicate only with each other by phone.
Here, this is Cardinal Joseph Tobin, for those who are watching back in the States. Born in Michigan, he's the Archbishop of Newark, New Jersey, and has been the Archbishop there since 2016. But to the technology point of this, they have swept the chapel. They've made sure there's no way for anyone to listen in.
And those who are even working with them inside Santa Marta, well, they will go back and take lunch breaks and siesta, something I think we all incorporate a little bit into our lives. But the people who are cooking, who are doing any kind of preparation, are also sworn to secrecy from anything that they might. One thing I was thinking of as we're hearing many of the men make their oaths at this point is the backdrop of the
Sweden. In an interview, he said, I always say we need holiness. And he has said that if we don't have a new pope by the end of the week, something happened here. And there'll be quite a storyline, I'm sure, that would emerge. When asked when he was in contender, he said, I must confess, this is when he told ABC News, I was so shocked that there might be some single people who would like it, but it's very unlikely that they will choose someone from the secular and northern part of Europe. Do you think that's the case, Father Martin?
I think it's unlikely, but it's possible. He's seen as a very modern person, a very kind person, a good evangelizer. And actually the fact that he is in a place where Catholics are in the minority might sort of recommend his candidacy to those people.
It seems on the modesty is the way that the cardinal is asked. Do you think they're going to be the next pope? I mean, only one way to do that.
Yeah, I think if anyone says yes, or I should be, or I will be, they can be disqualified. I know many of these people, and they are very humble people, and often many of them, they don't want to be pope. This is an awesome responsibility, and so this is not kind of false humility or false protestation.
Pope Francis famously said that he was surprised as the next pope. He did well during the conclave, and for Pope Benedict emerged as the next pope. obviously, but several years later, Pope Francis was older, and he famously had a suitcase, a small suitcase, and a return ticket. He was ready to go home. He had no idea he was leaving.
Yeah, he thought he was too old, as you said in the conclave before that. He was number 2 after Venice. By 2013, he thought his time was done, and he had already had his retirement picked out. So I think it's also one of the wonderful things about Francis is that because he didn't want it and didn't cling to it, he was very free when he finally received that election.
Lindsay was talking about the residence where they are all staying, which is sort of the guest house, if you will, and Pope Francis also stayed there as a cardinal and chose to never leave.
Yeah, he didn't want to stay in the Grand Apostolic Palace. He said it would be like a cage for him. Now, the open question is whether or not his successor will move back, because Casa Santa Marta, while very homey and very friendly, is also a guest house, and he would eat in the cafeteria, and the Pope would see people in the elevator, and the next Pope may not want that, and I think that would be perfectly fine if he decides to move back to a more formal residence.
Yes, we joked during our coverage back during the funeral, who are we to judge, right? If the Pope decides they want to move back into the Grand Papal residence, it just wasn't for Pope Francis, and I think that's what a lot of Catholics around the world were drawn to. This is Fridolina Mbongo Basumbi. It's Cardinal Basumbi from the Democratic Republic of Congo. And again, this speaks to the diversity of the church. He did break with Francis, though, after Francis signed off on a declaration allowing for priests to bless individuals in same-sex relationships. Cardinal Basumbi came out with a statement saying no blessing for homosexual couples in the African churches. So again, the Pope Francis expanding the reach of the church. But as James Longman pointed out just moments ago here, it does not mean that in those far corners where the Catholic Church is now represented and the people are heard, that they necessarily think and believe along the same lines as Pope Francis. Cardinal Zuppi from Italy is coming up next year. The Archbishop of Bologna, Italy, since 2015, also currently the president of the Italian Bishops' Conference. Like Francis, he's known as a street priest.
Yeah, he's been mentioned for years as a possible successor of Francis. He's very much affiliated with what's called the San Egidio movement in Italy and worldwide, which is a group that works with the poor and works for peace and justice. And he went from being a street priest working with sort of migrants and refugees to being archbishop and now being cardinal.
How likely is it we would have an Italian pope? I know that one of the reasons, and this was years back, that there was this effort to get beyond Italy, to get beyond Europe, to have popes from other parts of the world, and now we have had that. We have history with Pope Francis. But what do you think the chances are that there will be an Italian pope?
I think they're pretty high. Italians vote as a bloc. If people see an Italian pope as the stability, one of the arguments is the Italians here in the Vatican know how these things run. The Vatican is still kind of largely Italian culture.
This is Cardinal Whip Gregory, retired Archbishop of Washington. Born in Chicago, he's 77 years old, and I should note that he was sitting here in the booth a few years ago, back with Diane from the previous conclave that named Pope Francis. So I think he has a better spot this time around, actually, inside the Sistine Chapel. He has influence now in deciding the next pope. But on this notion of an Italian pope, your thoughts?
Well, I think it's an open question.
Like and share, folks.
Whether or not the sort of appeal of an Italian pope is providing stability and understanding the culture would be countered by people from overseas who might say the last thing we need is someone who is an Italian because the church is moving towards the global south. So that's, sort of pluses and minuses for an Italian pope.
Give us a black pope. Give us a black pope.
Terry Moran, who's with us for the coverage as well, Terry, and just for people watching back home, now that this has begun and they're each delivering their pope, they will soon close the doors to the Sistine Chapel. There will be a first vote this afternoon. They have the stove inside the Sistine Chapel. There actually are two burners, one for the ballots themselves, and inside the other stove, they actually burn chemicals, Terry, because obviously, as you know, they want to make sure there's been such confusion in years past. They're going to make sure that that smoke looks discernible. It's either white smoke or black smoke, and that the world knows. And back in 2005, when they had a new pope, people began to walk away because they thought the smoke was black that was emerging from that chimney. They had to get out the speakers here and say, no, don't leave. We have a new pope.
That's right, and so while they want to keep that tradition, which is so much a part of the church, a charming tradition really. They take the ballots and they burn them on straw. They make the straw damp to make it darker. Well, that just wasn't clear enough, especially given the cameras that can train on that chimney now. And so they make sure now they add a little something in there to make sure the message is absolutely clear. And it is a thrill when it happens. When you see that white smoke, there's just an energy that tears through the square. People get up on their toes. People from around Rome come into the square, and then you wait, and you don't know until they step out onto that balcony through those red velvet curtains, and that's when you finally know. It's just an amazing moment. We'll see that in the next couple of days.
It really will be amazing. And Terry, the time that elapses in between when they reach that 2/3 majority in the room, which again, the number that we'll be looking for obviously is the 89 votes gets you over that 2/3 threshold. There is time that then passes. Immediately the cardinal is asked, do you accept? And the answer is yes, no matter what the weight is, unless we're going to really make history this go around. And then they're taken into, Terry, what's called the room of tears, where already there are caskets hanging in multiple sizes.
That's right, and that's room of tears because responsibility is so great. It's been compared by some folks to the hill of Calvary where Christ was crucified. It's a walk that is almost painful to make. And there you see, there they are. They pick out the right size if they can find one. Sometimes it's not perfect, but it is the sign, that white castle, that they are the Holy Father now. And it is quite a moment, perhaps moving them to tears.
Approaching the Book of Gospels there, that's Cardinal Sango of Singapore, 67 years old. Pope Francis appointed him Archbishop of Singapore in 2013.
And again, it's a reminder of how global the church is. I think as Terry was saying, just by looking at the faces, you see how international Pope Francis helped to make the College of Cardinals more reflective of where the church is today.
As Terry was saying, after a pope is chosen, they are then asked if they accept and taken in to the room of tears, where they choose from the caskets that are hanging in the closet. Also, as part of that, the shoes are in that room, and as we all know, Pope Francis and Pope John Paul II, before him, they both declined to wear some of the choices that were in that room to go with a more modest sort of black leather shoe. This is Cardinal Pier Battista Pizzaballa. Am I allowed to have a favorite name here?
That is a favorite name among many people, and someone told me if he is Pope, he shouldn't change his name.
I was going to say, when you're asked which name do you want to take, how on earth can you give that up?
Yeah, I was going to say, one thing to look for after the announcement of the person who was elected is what name they take. That's going to be a little bit of a signal of what kind of papacy the person wants, depending on who they name themselves after.
It's been said that Pope Francis, when he was asked which name you will take, one of his peers had said just beforehand, as they're paying homage to the new Pope inside that chapel, one of his peers said, "Don't forget the poor," and he said that was in his mind, and he thought of obviously St. Francis of Assisi, whose mission it was to reach people at the margins and the poor people on the periphery. And so became King Francis.
That's right. So depending on what we hear, if we hear say Pope John Paul III, if someone wants to follow in John Paul's legacy, I don't think we're going to hear Francis II. But it's they always say after saying I accept, his first big decision as Pope is what name to take, and that really communicates a little bit to the world of who he wants to be.
And remind me, Father Martin, how soon do we learn the name when they say Abemus Pablo?
Yeah,
it's right here at the balcony behind us, which they already have the sort of curtains draped there in the famous balcony. When does the world learn the name that's been chosen?
Immediately after. So it's Habemus Papam, and then we hear the person's name. There's a Latin introduction. They say Qui sibi nomen imposuit, who has taken the name, and then as the last time they said Francisco, and then the person comes out. So it's pretty dramatic. So a double barrel announcement. Who is the new pope and what are we going to be calling it?
So that name was a real signal of what was coming because of what that name represented, but also a signal was when Pope Francis said, Buenos Aires, good evening to the faithful who are gathered in the square in such a sort of humble, modest, relatable way.
Yeah, very disarming. And then said, please pray for me. And while they're praying, you can see the cardinals around him not knowing quite what to do because he was breaking the tradition, which sort of set the stage for him to make this thing.
And for as heavy as this is, Lindsay, and the weight of this moment, swearing their oath to uphold the secrecy, the hard part for these cardinals actually comes next.
You're exactly right. And just back to that point of Pope Francis when he first emerged, it actually was only Thursday that he decided to go to a prison for young men and young women, which also signaled the departure from the kind of pope that he would be and the humility that he spoke of. And he said that the church shouldn't serve as shaking a finger at people, but comforting them. And so I think that that's what makes him such the people's pope. And that while looking at some of the descriptions of some of the people, one of them said that he is acceptable to many, loved by few. But Saint Francis, Pope Francis, pardon me, was loved by so many.
No question about that. And James Longman, I want to bring that notion to you because you talked to many of the cardinals here. Many of them didn't want to get into where they were leaning or what they were thinking as far as the direction of the next pope. But it was clear in your conversations that the Arab world was tonight that a number of them recognize the popularity, the ability for Pope Francis to connect on a level that will need to be met, and the humanity that he displayed as he traveled the world, and in many cases to the far reaches of the world.
David, I caught up actually with the Archbishop of Jakarta, and I said, what was it about Francis? Was it his faith? Was it kind of man he was? Was it the direction he took in the church? He said quite simply it was his simplicity. That was what Francis was about. And I think that's what I'm struck by watching these extraordinary pictures, David. Because look at this, we're inside the Sistine Chapel, 500-year-old building, built really to kind of celebrate the power and wealth of the church. These men are taking the oath in Latin, the ancient language of the church. Francis really was associated with all the other aspects of the church, the missionary church, the church that took all of this out into the world, in Conclave, encounter. So this is an interesting kind of contrast. These men will have it in their minds as well as they give this oath. Francis was heavily associated with Vatican II, the big reform of the church in the 60s, and that's what he was about, changing the church. So that will be on the mind of these men as they make their decision.
Yes.
No question about that, James. I think Francis had talked about the image of Jesus knocking on the door to get in, and that in many ways the church is the open doors for us to get out into the world. And again, that will be regardless of what our own issues are that are present with this next pope. And of course, the list is long, whether that be climate, LGBTQ community, the role of women in the church, sexual abuse, which still hasn't been completely obviously eradicated across the Catholic Church. There are still many issues that the church has to still contend with, Vatican finances and finances of the church globally, in fact. But one of the ways that you cannot argue is that Pope Francis was successful in reaching out and connecting on a very human level. And that's something that James is talking with that Archbishop and some of the cardinals who came in contact with that.
Right, and you're saying it started from the get-go, from his bowing and his asking for people's prayers. You mentioned washing the feet on Holy Thursday, and also one of the first things he said at the press conference was how he wanted a church that is for and for the church. And I'll tell you a funny story. I just heard the other night from a judge who knew him. When he was doing all these sort of surprising reforms and changes in the first few days, a friend said to him, boy, this is really something. And the Jesuit said, you haven't seen anything yet. So he was someone that wanted to make, as he said, a mess in the church, a good mess.
Yeah, and with some humor. And he started out with humor right there. I want to bring in Father John Walk again, who's with our coverage here today. And Father Walk, as we watch each one of these cardinals delivers these solemn oaths to uphold the secrecy inside the Sistine Chapel. I'm curious if you think, Father, if many of these men have in their mind at least their first step, who they will vote for, at least during this first ballot. I imagine many of them do have an idea about their favorite candidate already, but I think they're also open to listening to the Holy Spirit. I think one of the things that we were seeing here with the hymn that was sung to the Holy Spirit, the oath of secrecy that they're taking, is the idea that the voice that these people should be listening to, the cardinals should be listening to, is the voice of the Holy Spirit. Where they're trying to cut out all of the distractions. That's really what secrecy and all these restrictions is about, to make sure that they're not listening to the wrong voices and to make it easier for them to listen to the Holy Spirit. And that's what they're going to try to do in these days.
And Father Walker, to listen from within is what they're agreeing to do here, and not sharing it with the outside world. But in addition to that, how much of a conversation, once the conclave begins, once they start to see the numbers and the tallies at the end of each one of these votes, what then happens among this group of cardinals as far as conversation? I know not within the Sistine Chapel, but in those breaks in between. We've all seen the Conclave, the recent movie, and there have been so many depictions along the way. But give our viewers back home in the United States a sense of the conversations that do take part once they see where the numbers are headed.
Well, I think during this week of the meetings that they have called the congregations, before the conclave actually begins, is a time where they have a chance really to have open conversations with many different people about the issues that are facing the church, about different personalities and possible candidates. And probably during the actual voting, the conclave, when they meet after the morning session, say, they haven't elected someone, I think a lot of the discussion is going to be focused on what are realistic possibilities, right? Who has a real chance? Given the vote that we just saw, what is the possibility? And it's not going to be so much about the theoretical or global issues, but it's going to be about realistic possibilities.
Father Rob, thank you. We're looking at Cardinal Dominique Lamberti of France. He's the Cardinal Protodeacon. He'll be the one that goes to the balcony right here behind us and declares, "Habemus Papam," we have a Pope. And that, of course, will come. What do you think, Father Martin, after a day?
Just wishful thinking, maybe wishful thinking. I would say most cardinals that I was speaking to said probably 2 or 3 days.
2 or 3 days, which puts us obviously Thursday or Friday of this week. A number of cardinals have indicated that perhaps they think that's true. Of course, the challenge of this conclave is that these cardinals come from all over the world, and during these congregations leading up to this, they had to get to know each other, and will do so again after each one of these votes. This is Cardinal Kevin Joseph Farrell of the United States, former Bishop of Dallas, also considered to be a potential contender. But Father Wong, why is it unlikely that we would have an American Pope from the United States?
I think that it is unlikely that there'll be a Pope in the United States, and part of it has to do with sort of geopolitics, the overlapping of the prominence on the political sphere of the United States on the world stage makes people nervous about having also the head of the Catholic Church being from the United States. So America is too much with us, I think, is what people are thinking.
Terry Moran, it'd be hard, probably within that Sistine Chapel, to elect a pope from a superpower, and certainly the United States, which already has such a place on the global stage, such influence, to then name a pope from the United States as well would be a reach.
That's always been the thinking. As Father Watt said, the superpower having the world's most global religious office would probably strike a lot of these cardinals. There's just too much in the United States. Remember, there also is the fact that right now the United States, under the leadership of President Trump, he's changing things around the world in ways that are stunning a lot of people around the world, including a lot of people probably in that Sistine Chapel. The way he's trying to kind of wrench the world trading system into a new alignment and the world security system and a sense of nationalism, greater nationalism, and depending the nationalists in the United States rather than that kind of more internationalist feel. All those have already impacted elections around the world. In Australia, most recently in Canada, there was a Trump factor. It's a question. Is there a Trump factor in the Sistine Chapel?
And Terry, these conversations that take place, I just find this so fascinating because it's one of the few places where we cannot get access as reporters and journalists, and so it just makes it even more intriguing for me and the rest of us here assembled. But once they begin within the Sistine Chapel and take breaks for lunch, and then for certainly for dinner and to get some rest before prayer the next day and another round of voting both in the morning and in the evening, they're all fully aware of where the map is headed, that they need to get to a 2/3 majority inside that room, that they're going to need to get to that 89 vote threshold. And that's when some of the politics truly comes into play. Now, whether we can believe what we've seen in the movie The Conclave or certainly in the books that have been written about this process, there is a fair amount of, well, convincing, if you will, or sort of leaning on a peer within the Cardinals to say this is the direction it's going in. Is there some compromise here? What can you share for the audience watching back home in the States about the conversations that take place once they're sequestered?
Well, David, it's interesting. Pope Francis himself provided an account of the 2005 conclave that eventually elected Pope Benedict XVI. He got a fair number of votes. Pope Benedict, then Cardinal Ratzinger, was well ahead, but Jorge Bergoglio, the future Pope Francis, got some votes, and his started to increase apparently through some of the votes, and maybe Cardinal Ratzinger, then Pope Benedict, didn't do as well. And what Pope Francis said years later is he felt he was being used to block Cardinal Ratzinger, and he disavowed it, and that is a political moment, no question about it.
And in fact, he thought that was the closest he would ever come to becoming Pope. And as I had mentioned earlier, Terry, he had a return ticket to Argentina during the conclave that elected him.
That's right, and there is a sense, even in American presidential elections, that somebody wants it too much might not be the right person for such a powerful job. And I think maybe perhaps in the Sistine Chapel, there's a feeling of that as well. They are discerning. They are trying to sense and figure out what the best path is and what the best person is. You mentioned the number 89, however. That is the 2/3 majority number. The other number is 45. Right, that's the number that could block 2/3, and that could be politically important in their consideration as well.
The final oath here, the final individual oath of the Cardinals inside the Sistine Chapel after having taken that group oath together. And silence now fills that room. We are not long from those famous words that will send anyone who is not an elector from the Sistine Chapel. Let's listen.
Extra omnes.
Of course, extra omnes, those are the key words in Latin, meaning everybody out. Everybody who is not an elector in that room. There will just be a couple of people who remain in that room to help deliver a meditation about the weight of the moment. You can see those who are not electors now leaving the room, the Sistine Chapel, and of course the Swiss Guard standing outside those doors. And for those cardinals inside hearing extra omnes, Lindsay, I think that's the finality of this moment for all of them, that they're not leaving that room, at least not until there's one vote under their belt.
Right, not for, like the 789, it says in the last 179 years, that is for 3.3 days. So that math does get us to, as the cardinal that the Dean spoke to, that it would be likely that we'll have a new pope by Friday.
As we watch these images, I want to bring in Maggie Bruley from down in St. Peter's Square. And Maggie, I gather it's not as crowded as it will be over the course of the next couple of days with anticipation builds. Oh, look, Maggie has a lot of room to herself in the square. That will not be the case come Thursday or Friday, Maggie.
David, you're exactly right. It was a feeling that anticipation buildings. Like, just imagine this, David. Whenever we see that white smoke building into the sky, whatever that might be, we're expecting thousands of people to come rushing into St. Peter's Square surrounding us here. This has a capacity of 250,000. That's going to get maxed out. We expect people in the streets. They already have 5,000 police and volunteers on hand. So imagine that energy. We're already feeling it today. So I think when that moment comes, we're going to really stand in the middle of history with it.
And we'll be here to witness that history with you, Maggie. Our thanks to you again, Maggie. Really right down in St. Peter's Square. You can hear the bells tolling behind me. As those who are not involved in the election of this next pope leave the Sistine Chapel, only the electors stay inside that room. And again, there are 133 of them taking part in this conclave, the most diverse conclave that we have witnessed in our time. And of course, Pope Francis appointing 108 of those electors. They need to reach a 2/3 majority, which puts you at the 89 vote mark before they will send white smoke up that small chimney that will emerge atop the Sistine Chapel. We saw those magnificent images in the last couple of days of Vatican firefighters on top of the Sistine Chapel, actually putting that chimney up back into place. And now the doors close. You can hear the applause breaking up behind us here in St. Peter's Square. As those doors, the echo, the closing of the doors heard across Vatican City, Father Martin, and the Swiss Guard standing there beside those doors. We know that inside, and I already want to get to what's been still playing out inside on the other side of that building, we're not talking Cardinal Kendall Mesa, who was chosen earlier by the College of Cardinals. He'll give a meditation concerning the grave duty incumbent on them and thus on the need to act with right intention for the good of the universal church. And he'll tell them having only God before your eyes.
Yeah, great images of the doors closing and extra omnes. It really does underline the secrecy of everything. Cardinal Conclave was the papal preacher who would preach during retreats. The Pope liked him very much and made him a cardinal. And so this is just a kind of meditation, or something we would say a fervorino kind of exhortation to follow the Holy Spirit and also maintain that secrecy.
With just a couple moments left, the sun shining over St. Peter's Square, James. It started out rainy today, but a glorious afternoon here.
Like and subscribe, folks. Like and subscribe. Pope
I'm just marveling at what we've just witnessed. The mystery of all this, the history, the tradition. We live in such a fast-paced world. Everything is immediate. We want it right now. While these cardinals are teaching us some patience, we're going to have to wait. And we'll be right here waiting.
Terry Moran, a medieval moment for sure, as James points out, for a church that's 2,000 years old, back to its roots. No communication now with the cardinals who will elect the new pope.
There's nothing else like it in the world, an election like this. It does have those ancient roots, and what they do is take away many of the distractions of the modern world, right? There's no cell phones in there. There's no communication.
Make sure you like and subscribe, folks. Click the like button.
Other prayers.
Click the like button.
Just a stunning backdrop.
Click the like button, folks. 6 people, not even 1 likes. Come on, Pope Paul, Pope Pius. The most important election in the world. This election is for your souls, right? That man holds the key to St. Peter. All right, so remember, like, share, subscribe.
Something certainly spiritual about this moment.
No question about that. And again, the voting, there should be 1 round of voting this afternoon, and we will carry that to you as soon as we have a signal from the chimney atop of the Sistine Chapel. Though likely not the deciding vote. Thank you for watching. I'll be back on the air this afternoon to let you know what happens in the first vote, and I'll see you for work. Good day.
This has been a special report from ABC News.
All right, so I'll bring it live later, okay, folks? Pope Paul, the next conclave, the next pope. Vatican City.
Live first, you've been watching ABC News special coverage as the conclave gets underway at the Vatican.
Cardinals from 70 countries are now sequestered. Just a little while ago, they took an oath of secrecy before they start voting for a new pope. That College of Cardinals will vote 2 times in the morning and 2 times in the evening until at least 2/3 agree on one name. After each vote, the ballots are burned and the smoke emanating from the chimney on top of the Sistine Chapel indicates the results. White smoke means a pope has been chosen. Black smoke means they have to vote again. And I want to bring in our Patrick Riebel, who's there in Rome right now. Patrick, what's it like as these cardinals are now officially sequestered and starting that process of the conclave?
Hi Dan, yeah, we're down here. We've been seeing people stopping and watching these big screens that are lined up all the way down to St. Peter's there, watching what's going on inside the Vatican and watching this process, the cardinals filing into the Sistine Chapel, where they then swore this oath of secrecy. We swore it in Latin, and we watched each of the 133 cardinal electors do that. We watched the famous words said by the master of the ceremony, extra omnes, the Latin phrase meaning everybody out. People then file out, everyone except the cardinals, and then we saw the doors of the Sistine Chapel swing shut with this dramatic clanging sound. And now the conclave is begun. They will now begin their first round of voting in there. And as you say, we expect to see tonight the first smoke coming from the Sistine Chapel's chimney, black or white, black meaning the decision, white meaning a pope has been chosen. I think very few people expect that we will see white smoke tonight. So as you say now, the conclave thoroughly begun.
And Patrick, what do we know about what's happening behind the closed doors right now?
Yeah, so we know that once the doors close and once everyone has left, the voting process will begin following a brief statement by an ecclesiastic who will basically remind the cardinals of the importance of what they're about to do. And the voting will take place. First, it will be silence. It will not be a chamber of debate. There will not be people giving campaign speeches. Instead, it will be a time for first silent prayer while the cardinals then decide on their votes. They will write their votes on a single piece of paper. Then each of them will individually go up to the urn at the front, which is underneath Michelangelo's painting of the Last Judgment. There, they will say a phrase pledging that they believe this is the right choice. They will put their vote into the urn. And then, once all the cardinals have voted, each ballot will be threaded with a piece of string. They will be counted up. And then, once that has happened, they will be placed into a furnace for the chimney. They will actually add now some chemicals to make it black or white, because in the past there used to be some confusion apparently when they used to try and do it with purely natural means. They don't want any confusion. But we expect in the next few hours some type of smoke coming from the Sistine Chapel's chimney there.
And Patrick, 108 of the 133 voting cardinals were appointed by Pope Francis. So most of these cardinals have never done this before.
Yeah, man, this is the most diverse conclave in history. As you say, 80% of them appointed by Pope Francis, who made it a point of his papacy to find and appoint cardinals from all corners of the world and from places that have never had cardinals before, in particular outside of Europe. And so many of them, this will be their first experience of voting in a conclave. It's the first time that many of them will have met each other. But for the last 2 weeks since Pope Francis has met, there have been this general congregation to these pre-conclave meetings here at the Vatican, where basically the cardinals are able to get together and meet and discuss some of their ideas, discuss the sort of pope that they want to see come out of this. So for many of them it will be a first experience. We've even heard some reports that the cardinals watching the movie Conclave to try and get an idea of what to expect. But now, for the closing of those doors, with the ceremony with the oaths being sworn to secrecy, we really now will see the beginning of this conclave, and we'll wait now to see the first smoke there.
And not a movie anymore. Now it's happening for real. So, Patrick, is there any sense of the number of cardinals having been appointed by Pope Francis, of that having any influence in the next pope and who they choose?
Yeah, Dan, I mean, I think it's believed very much to potentially have an impact. I think, the central question of this conclave is, will it produce a pope who follows, who wants to follow the same more liberal, open legacy of Pope Francis, one focused on outreach to the poor, on social justice issues. Pope Francis, of course, also liberalizing the church's attitudes towards LGBTQ issues, also focusing the church on climate issues. We've heard from many cardinals over the past few days that they do believe that it's very important that the church remains following that more open path of Pope Francis. And there's also belief as part of that, whether that means we could perhaps see the first Asian Pope, for example. One of the top front runners going into this is Cardinal Conclave of the Philippines. He is considered to be really among the top contenders, and so he's often called the Asian Francis. And we've heard from people saying they believe it is a possibility, but ultimately this is seen as a pretty open field, and we'll have to wait to see who is elected there.
We sure will. All right, I want to head over to St. Longman now. Patrick, thank you. James has also been following this for us from there in the Vatican. Beautiful view, James. So walk me through this. They vote up to 4 times a day. Is there a specific timeline for that?
Yeah, so there's going to be a vote later today. We don't know exactly when. They're likely going to start their voting pretty soon, actually, in the next 5-10 minutes, I guess. I wish I was in there. I'm not. In about an hour, we'll get smoke of some description, black or white. It's going to be black, I would have said, because they're not going to have made a decision this early on. They'll be burning those ballots, and we'll see the smoke. And then it will go away for a night of contemplation to think about the names that were read out at tonight's vote. What usually happens in the first vote, we know this because there's been a book written about what happened when Francis was elected, is a lot of the cardinals get one vote. It's kind of a level of respect for some of the senior cardinals. But there are cardinals who will get more than that, the key number of course being 89, that's how many votes you need to win. So there will be cardinals with a handful of votes, maybe up to 15, 20 maybe in this first round. And then tonight, the cardinals will go away back there to San Martin, and they are cut off from the rest of the world. And they will have time to think, to reflect on the names that we now know are in the public sphere. Devotion to the vote.
We'll be watching St. Longman. Thank you. And we will be keeping a close eye on that chimney on top of the Vatican for you. We'll bring you the results of the first vote later today, right here on ABC News Live. And we have much more news for you after the break. Stay with us.
We all bring something different to the table. Benny's original. We're all original recipes. Many people told us they had stuffed crust pizza from Domino's before. Only Domino's has never had stuffed crust before. Pizza. Until now. Introducing Domino's new and first ever stuffed crust pizza. Yummy. Try one for the first time tonight. Once in a lifetime, it's never enough. Never enough. For the right finger, for every finger. For right now, for all the joy, the love, the warmth, the goodness.
Yes, people, Judah Lion Lifestyle TV here. Hunting subscribers, hunting watch hours. Alright, so do your boy a favor. Let's go down there, so subscribe. And we're waiting to see who will be the next Satan, the next Pope. Right? St. Peter, representative. Yeah. It's one of the most important elections in this world. No presidents, no prime ministers. It's more like a king. It's more like anointing a king, the Pope. History of the Pope started from St. Peter, who Jesus gave, according to the Bible, according to what they said, he gave them the keys to heaven. Right? Right. So, I'll catch you all later again when they elect the new Pope. Have a blessed day.